How's it going, everyone? We have a guest with us. Our guest today is Accidental Albermelon. How are you this afternoon?
I'm pretty well. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for asking. I'm so glad to have you on and speak with you. So, how long have you
Oh,
had
thanks for
an
having me.
interest? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said thanks for having me.
Oh, of course, yeah. I saw some of your images and some of your laboratory experiments on Instagram, and that very much interested me because in today's society, it's so much about the philosophical aspects of alchemy
Hmm.
as opposed to the actual laboratory scientific approach. So,
Oh, big time.
how long have you been interested in esoteric philosophy and alchemy and these things?
Alchemy has only been within the last like 5 years or so. I tried started 5 years ago, but then I didn't do very well, so I put it off for a few years. I got really into it again last year. I've
Mhm.
been interested in esoteric studies for quite a while. I actually couldn't pinpoint the number of years for that because I at first kind of got into it on the conspiratorial side, like watching it. Oh, like what are the Masons doing, or what is the Illuminati doing, and like the Rosicrucians. But then, of course, that kind of planted the seed that started to grow years later. But I also was interested in like magical adjacent stuff, like as a kid, like everything I liked. So, like all the Disney movies had something to do with magic. Like I was obsessed with Merlin and the
Oh yeah,
Sword and the Stone. And then there was this weird live action Disney movie called Bed Knobs and Broomsticks that I
I
used to
loved
love.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
And
love.
then,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, no worries.
I was gonna say that I loved the Sword and the Stone and like the Black Cauldron and
Oh,
like
yeah.
Bed Knobs and Broomsticks. All of these movies as a kid that was it was almost like just a tug, like a
Hmm.
gentle tug into the occult. And some of my mom's friends couldn't stand that I was allowed to like watch things like that because they were of the devil and all of these things. But I found that once I was led into the so-called occult or esoteric studies, I found such a much greater capacity to understand myself and to be able to help other people that it drives me crazy sometimes to hear people call this stuff, devil worship. And certainly some
Yeah.
people do use it to worship the devil, but it's not inherent within the craft itself.
Oh, definitely not. It's actually quite the opposite in many ways.
Uh-huh.
But
And you
yeah.
mentioned that when you first got started, you said that you were encountering some difficulties with alchemy specifically. Um, so is that something that you could talk to us about? Is like, was it that you didn't have the right equipment? Was it that you didn't have enough of like an understanding in chemistry? Like what sort of deferred you from that practice to begin with?
It was a little bit of everything. There were certainly equipment limitations,
Mhm.
but I think the biggest part of it is, like they say in alchemy, you have to transmute it within yourself before you can transmute
Mhm.
it without. So
Mhm.
at that point in my life, the way that I was living was somewhat incongruent with my innermost being, I suppose.
Sure.
So I hadn't really even like kind of gone through the fire yet in my personal life, which
I see.
happened a few months later. I think probably even spurned about by the alchemy. But yeah.
Awesome.
So I was actually on the other side of the country in BC at the time, house sitting for a friend, and they had lemon balm in their garden and St. John's wort and a few other things. And I was reading the Frater Albertus at the
Mhm.
time, the what is it, the Alchemist Handbook.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I decided, you know what, like we're here for like a month, maybe I'll start doing some experimenting. And I got frustrated really quickly as soon as I came to calcination because no matter what I did, I could not get it to reduce to anything below like the blackest ash you could imagine.
Hmm. Interesting.
But I
And
didn't,
go ahead.
I guess I didn't really even know what the proper equipment would be at the time. Because like even like Frater Albertus, as classic of a text as it is, it's not like the greatest starting point. Like I would more recommend something like Mark Stavish's The Path of Alchemy to begin, because it's a lot like easier and clearer.
Okay. I will definitely make a note of that. I'm actually making my way through a few books right now, but that is not one. You said that was by Mark Stavish?
Yeah, and that one would especially probably be good for you because it has a lot about the more inner side of alchemy, like using the tinctures to kind of cleanse your inner anatomy to make it easier for you to travel between worlds and whatnot.
I love that. That's one of the things that I got in, I guess, back into the laboratory aspect of alchemy was like, wait a second, I can use these tinctures and these spagyrics or spagyrics as sort of initiatory process or initiatory components, and certainly in spellcraft as well, using
Oh yeah.
a spagyric and a healing spell or something like that was just so appealing to me that I'm like, why didn't I
Mm-hmm.
think of this before?
Oh yeah. There's
Awesome.
like such wide application to it. It's not even funny. And like it is alchemy in general is very theurgic. Like there's a
Hmm.
lot of there's a very big devotional side. Like
Sure.
there's the one saying, what do they say? Ora et labora. It's like work, well, pray and work, but prayer
Yeah.
always comes first.
Yes, exactly. I love that. And so now that you've sort of had another crack at it, you mentioned difficulties in calcination at first, and we had spoken privately um, about you sort of had, I don't know that I would call it a breakthrough. You certainly, I don't believe called it a breakthrough. I would call it a breakthrough. And the calcination process. You had mentioned, it escapes me off the top of my mind now, but you mentioned that you sort of realized something that helped with calcination. Is that something you could speak to?
Well, it was more of a personal breakthrough, I would say.
Sure.
It's like I think it's something you almost have to learn through trial and error on your own,
Hmm.
unless you're like working one on one with the teacher, which I have never really done. So it was very much a trial and error process.
Hmm.
So the major thing that I learned, I would say, was the importance of the initial burn.
Hmm.
Because like a lot of the texts will talk about like how delicate the finer salts are, and like you have to be careful and like, cover the crucible and make sure they don't get out. And I took that a little bit too much to heart, and I covered
Okay.
the crucible so much that there wasn't enough oxygen getting in to really cause the necessary
Oh,
combustion to get it started. And then I was even
okay.
having more problems, like when I was actually burning like the carbon off the plant material, because I had the crucible totally covered, the smoke was starting to kind of condense and coagulate and drift back down into the herb,
I
which made it
see.
way, which like created a lot extra, much of extra work.
That is a perfect metaphor for spiritual processes as well. So
Oh yeah.
you basically the smoke was recondensing and
Mm-hmm.
was tarnishing the product.
Exactly.
Wow.
And I
So
was like kind of spinning my wheels for a while there.
yeah, I mean you try to go by the book, but it just goes to show that some things can only be experienced through personal trial and error. I love that.
Oh, totally.
Was
And
there
that's
anything,
been,
go ahead.
I was gonna say that's been like a major theme through just all of occultism in general for me as well.
Yeah.
Like there's only so much you can learn from the books.
Yeah, absolutely. The very first part of my sort of magical career, I was what most people would refer to as an armchair occultist, and then I read something from Jung that said this isn't what inspired me to do it, but it was like a synchronicity. I realized that I was going to have to do the dance to understand the song, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. And then right after that, I read something from Jung that said something along the lines of the the living meaning of the words can only take root when you've begun to interact with them, or something. That's, I completely butchered it, but that's more or less the gist of it. And it seems like yeah, I agree with what you're saying, that part of this practice is getting your hands dirty and making mistakes.
Oh yeah,
And
unfortunately.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the mistakes will cost you in this realm too.
yeah, absolutely. One of the most pricey components of a mistake is the time, right? Because we've only got
Mm-hmm.
so much time. Awesome. So what other interests do you have in the occult or the esoteric side of philosophy?
Ooh, like almost everything really. But like I started off with the Golden Dawn. Well, not 100% started off, but that's where I really found myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I have quite a firm foundation there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also really interested in tarot, and especially from the kind of more of a Boda Paul Foster Case perspective. I really like
Okay.
his take on the cards, and in Kabbalah and like Gematria and stuff in general. And yeah, Kabbalah is huge for me as well. I think Kabbalah and alchemy almost have to go hand in hand in a way.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. It's I look at I forget how it was explained to me one time, but there's like a trinity between like alchemy, tarot, and astrology.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it's like astrology is like why it's happening, the tarot is how it's happening, and the alchemy is like, okay, what do I do now? Like in order to sort of get through that process that's occurring. I don't know if you've ever heard that before,
I
but I
think
like
I have. I'm trying to think of where I heard that, but I have.
yeah,
I
I
couldn't
don't
agree
off
more.
the top of my head, I don't remember where I heard that either, but I've got a diagram on my wall that has that triangle. And inside that triangle is Kabbalah, because that's how I understand
Hmm.
the relationships between the two. I've, as you've probably noticed from my other videos, we had talked privately about this, that I mentioned the Golden Dawn somewhat frequently. That
Oh
was a
yeah.
very large part of my foundation as well, because it was such an approachable system that was
Hmm.
also seemingly very eclectic and all encompassing of other traditions. And I like to look at religion and philosophy and magic as a pie, and each tradition is like one piece of that pie. Got a train going
Oh,
by.
very much the same.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So let's see.
There's a lot of people complain about the eclecticism of the Golden Dawn, but the fact that they were able to fit it all together as well as they did is pretty incredible.
Absolutely. So you also mentioned tarot. So when you approach tarot, is that something that is more meditative, or is it something that you do professionally?
Uh, I try to use tarot in basically almost any way that you can.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit professionally. My partner does it more professionally. On the professional side, I more help in a mentor capacity, like help other people learn tarot rather
Mm-hmm.
than necessarily doing as many readings.
Okay.
But a big part of our work is definitely the meditative side and almost even using it as somewhat of a magical training system because tarot
Yes.
prevents a very unique opportunity to like entrain like the left and right brain or like your Hod and Netzach sides
Yes, absolutely.
and get
And
them working almost like a pair of like 3D glasses that like go together and then get the information that's hidden within the text to pop out a bit better.
absolutely. And it's almost like a color by numbers for the aspirant, because I mean it lays out the process that we all go through and the evolution of our consciousness. We begin as the fool, then then we
Oh
become
yeah.
the magician, and it just it lays it all out. And that's one of the things that I recommend for a lot of my clients and my students is study the tarot, because it tells you what to do, and you can sort of pinpoint where you are in your process. And if you're lost and you don't know where to go, look at the tarot, because it's an age old story.
Oh yeah. It somehow like almost contains like basically every aspect of the human experience.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's highly archetypal. So do you have a favorite deck or favorite decks just off the top of your head that you like to meditate with the most?
We almost exclusively use the Rider Waite tarot, or I should say
Okay.
the Smith Waite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Give Pamela her shine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they just sort of cut her out.
Yeah.
I love that. I've actually got one of all four of my walls. I have, like, I've got the Night Sun tarot here, but then I've got the Lon Milo Duquette ceremonial magic tarot, the
Oh
Thoth
wow.
tarot, and then I have the Rider Waite tarot. So when I'm in this room, I'm sort of surrounded by the archetypal energies. It's like the universe is surrounding me. But I one of them that I have is the Waite Smith tarot, because of just how simple and basic it doesn't get in its own way, you know?
Hmm. And there's just like even somehow within that simplicity, there's so much complexity. Because like we've studied these cards so for so many hours, and we'll like look at a card and notice something we've never seen before. Like one
Absolutely.
of our big things that we do is called like it's a series we call the 78 connections, and we'll take two cards and look at them side by side and kind of like compare and contrast like not only like the imagery but also like correspondences and whatnot. And like you would not believe some of the stuff that pops out.
I love it.
Like
And there's the whole you mentioned the comparing two cards. One of my favorite things about tarot is taking like this, like say the magician and the empress, number one and number three. What's happening to my focus? Focus here, camera, please focus. What's happening? Let's see here. Focus, maybe. That's weird. There we go.
Oh, there
All
we go.
right, we're back. Um, is taking like the magician and the empress, so to speak, number one and number three. 1 plus 3 is 4, and meditating on the fourth card, the emperor, or taking the second and the ninth card and meditating on them in relation to the 11th card.
Oh yeah.
One of my favorite things. Is that something that you've done?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's like exactly it. And
Yeah.
just all the different ways. Like even with like say like the emperor, like the number 4, like that it contains obviously like the first 3 preceding cards, like the 1 plus 2, like it's like all. But then you, if you subtract, if you add the numbers that, sorry, like we think of like the theosophical reduction a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but say if you take like the number 4, like the emperor, and you add like 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, like the numbers that form it, we get 10. Then there's a connection to the wheel there.
The wheel. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. I it's something that I had forgotten. That's certainly something that makes sense. So do you have a favorite card, or maybe favorite
Ooh.
cards that you meditate on the most?
One of our favorite cards, like my partner and I, is probably the Hangman. And there, another interesting numerological thing about the Hangman: if you add every number in 1 to 12 in sequence, you get 78.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know if I knew that or not. That I appreciate the insight there. That is something to That's going to keep me going, because I think the Hanged Man is probably my favorite card. I'm looking now. The Hermit definitely resonates with me a lot, but I feel like I'm moving out of my Hermit phase, and that sort of put me upside down for a little bit. So I highly resonate with the Hanged Man, certainly, and the Death card as well, because I believe that death
Mhm.
is an initiatory process, and as long as one embraces death, they can truly accept life to a very large degree. Awesome.
You almost have to, in a way.
Yeah, yeah, you kind of do. Otherwise, I don't know, you're kind of cutting yourself off. So is there a
Your
certain
whole life experience will be trying to prevent your death.
exactly, yeah, and you might just find it more quickly that way.
Yeah. Oh,
do
exactly.
do you have a favorite spread that you like to read with, or anything like that?
I used to love this one spread in the, I think it was in the Cicero's New Golden Dawn Ritual Tarot,
Mm-hmm.
where it was like, I can't remember it exactly, but there's like a place for subconsciousness. Uh, oh my God, I screwed up.
It's okay.
Okay,
So yeah. Um,
sorry. Like it's part of it too is it's been a long time since I've really worked with spreads. Like because of what the work that we've done with the connections and whatnot, we can get so much more out of like a single card or like 1 or 2 cards. So a lot of the time, I'll either just like pull a single card, or sometimes I'll pull one card and then like look at the bottom of the deck as like the foundation of the reading.
I like that. I like that. I'm not really big on spreads either. I see, and certainly to each their own, but I see some people pulling like 7, 14 cards. I'm like, at that point, you may as well be
Oh yeah,
reading like a Lenormand deck or something, where you draw out sort of the whole deck. For me, a lot of times I'll pull out one card and then at most like 2 or 3 like clarifiers.
yeah,
And that's been enough for me for a long time, but I haven't been doing this as long as some people. So,
yeah.
like I said, to each their own, but I definitely appreciate, the fact that, you don't necessarily need to rely on a spread. I think that, to me, that shows a greater level of insight with each card that you draw.
For years, I used to do like huge spreads every day though. Like I do one 10 card spread and then I do an entire like geomancy reading every single day. It was like, but how much can things really shift with like from day to day? It's almost like
that's
a little bit of an overkill,
that's
but
an
it helps
interesting
you
point.
learn.
Hmm. So geomancy isn't something that we've really talked about on this channel. Is it Has it been like too long for you to talk about that, or is that something that you still have some insight on that you could share with us?
Well, I could talk a bit about geomancy.
I'd love to. So I know there are major forms I, I can't remember how many major forms there are. Um, but there are major forms that mean certain things, right?
Or like the tetragrams, like the little, they're like
Yeah,
16 figures, and they're tetragrams.
figures.
They're kind of linked to the planets, the signs. It's almost like a form of astrology that you can just like cast an astrological chart for the moment. But the one difference is that like some planets like will likely repeat themselves, like appear
Hmm.
more than once, whereas in astrology they obviously can't.
Right, right.
But when they do, I find they usually do it in kind of interesting patterns. Like especially say like when I'm doing like a theurgic geomancy reading, especially I find with Mercury when you're working with like forgive my pronunciation, but I'll obviously butcher it with like Teftharath,
Uh-huh.
the planetary spirit of Mercury.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
There's always some really strange sequence that involves the mercurial figures, conjunctio and albus.
Uh-huh.
There's always some weird pattern in there in the chart.
Interesting. Hmm. Yeah, Mercury's the trickster. So
Oh yeah.
I could definitely see, some interesting things happening there. I have an associate who has been doing like political predictions, like actual like
Oh wow.
geopolitical correction predictions with geomancy over, I don't know, the last few years, and have they've been surprisingly accurate. They
Oh,
did
I'm not
one thing
surprised.
about the war between Russia and Ukraine, just as an example, and a very, very interesting approach, certainly, but also it's
Wow.
very interesting how accurate they've been with some of it.
That was it used to be a favorite divination system of Rigardi's, like for
Sure.
that reason. Because like as he said, like there's less room for delusion.
Right.
Like whereas
That makes a
tarot,
lot
you
of
can like kind of read into some extra things if you want, if you're not that honest with yourself.
or you
But
can ignore
geomancy
certain things. Uh-huh.
kind of says what it says, and you kind of have to take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I remember in the beginning of 2018, I did a year ahead predictive geomancy reading, and it basically told me that like my life was going to fall apart in all these places. I actually only found it again recently in my book, and I had just written, "Please don't let this happen" or something along those lines. But looking back, it predicted literally everything down to the last detail.
that's
It's really interesting system of divination.
that's remarkable. So now, do you use like coins? Do you use stones? Do you use runes?
I use this really nice geomancy set that I got from the people that run Azoth Art. It's like
Hmm.
a website. They're involved with the Cicero's Golden Dawn Temple in Florida, but they
Hmm.
make like really amazing Golden Dawn implements, mostly
Yeah.
the fabric stuff. Like they do wonderful banners of East and
Yeah.
West as well.
Hmm.
But I use this set, and it's basically just dice. They're like dice. They're like the four different colors of Malkuth, and then just like half of the sides are one dot and the other half two.
Very cool. And you're referring to like the citrine, olive, russet, and black.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. I love that. And now I'm sort of remembering that I was going to learn geomancy so that I could cast runes and then sort of read more deeply into the geomantic figures using the meanings of the runes as well.
Oh,
But I
that's really
completely forgot about that until just now when we were just talking about it.
wow. That's something to explore for sure.
Mhm, definitely. So tarot and geomancy, is there any other form of divination that you're familiar with, or that you like to do?
A little bit of astrology, and I'm
Okay.
starting to study medical astrology now to kind of go with the alchemical stuff, and that
Cool.
is really really interesting.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I would say I'm very sparing on astrology. I don't really put much stock into horoscopes. I'm not sure how you feel about horoscopes.
Gotcha. Uh like newspaper horoscopes,
Right.
nothing really, but like
Right,
natal
right.
charts.
That's what I meant.
My natal chart has helped me understand myself quite a bit. So it's
Definitely.
to me, it's kind of demonstrated its application. Like that's how I work with a lot of this stuff. Is like I'm very pragmatic. So
Mhm.
if I'm going to use something, like it has to work. If my life doesn't have any kind of improvements from it, then I will kind of put it to the side.
Right. Yeah. Use what you can and put the rest to the side. I like that. I love the natal chart too. One of the things that I do is I have a printout of my natal chart, and I will, like, when I'm if I'm doing a personal spell or a personal working, like I will put the candles and the things in the very center of my natal chart to just sort of really hone in on my own specific energy.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
another thing that I do when I'm path working, I've got another printout of my natal chart where my black mirror is sitting right in the center of that natal chart to
Oh, I
just
like that.
again sort of help me hone in on the specific energy that is my own, formula, so to speak.
Oh, that's amazing. Because in a way, the natal chart is kind of like our sphere of sensation. Like it's
Yeah, it
almost like
is.
a diagram of it in a way.
Yeah, it is. And it's like your own coordinates,
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
cosmos. Very cool. So is there any form of ceremony or rituals that you practice on a semi-regular basis or a regular basis?
Not as much these days because I've gotten so immersed in the alchemy, but I have brought some of the ceremonial in the alchemy, especially like more Kabbalistic magic
Hmm.
and like vibratory formulas and whatnot. Like I use a lot of, like, say, for example, when I'm working on like a tincture or something, especially when I'm doing say, the recombination phase,
Hmm.
I will, on the appropriate planetary hour every day, I'll take the tincture out, I'll sit with it, I'll say a little prayer, and then I will like vibrate the appropriate divine name into it, like imagining the right color and uh, I do it the number of times of the
Hmm.
sphere related to the planet. So like say I'm working on some Mars stuff right now. So
Hmm.
like I'll vibrate like Elohim Gabor 5 times and
Right.
imagine it in like flame going into the liquid in like a flaming red color.
I
Another
love
cool
that.
thing that you can do is like if you have like a pitch pipe or something, like if you're a
Yes.
singer or whatnot, you can vibrate the name according to the right note associated with the planet. And that's something I want to try soon. To just
I
get it
love
like
it.
as synchronized as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, stacking correspondences is honestly probably my favorite thing that I've learned from Kabbalistic studies is just
Mm-hmm.
being able, it's another like coordinates. It's like instead of working with just the longitude and latitude, you're adding like minutes and seconds to the
Oh yeah.
specificity of the working. Very, very, very cool. So yeah, I've never heard anyone mention that before. And that creates yet again another connection, as above, so below, as within, so without. You're taking that internal working and making it external, and taking the external working and making it internal. And I
Oh,
I think
exactly.
that's the purpose of a lot of this, or maybe not the purpose, but I think that's the benefit of a lot of
Mm-hmm.
this.
And that it has helped with that a lot because that's been one of the major themes of the alchemical work with me is you get so into it, it almost dissolves the subject object barrier in a way. And it's like you're
Sure.
working on yourself. You're like isolating this aspect of yourself that you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's almost like the retort in and of itself, the alchemical
Oh,
retort.
exactly. Yeah.
Very cool. So when you reflect on magic and theory and practice, is there anything that you would consider to be like your least favorite types of things, either because you don't enjoy them or because you don't agree with them?
Uh, hmm. I thought about that from your questions, but there's not necessarily anything that I like don't like or I disagree with a ton. Like
Hmm.
there are things that I just maybe don't resonate with as much or I don't do. Like I'm not big into like goetic magic, but I'm not necessarily against it.
Hmm.
It's just something that I'm not personally like drawn towards.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, so what are some things that inspire you to practice, things that you like? Do you use like music and incense and things like that, or are you just sort of sitting there and you're like, oh, like I think I'll do this or I think I'll do that? Like what inspires you to do these things?
It's hard to explain, but in a way, it kind of just like happens.
Hmm.
Like it erupts from me. Like I know the direction that I'm supposed to go in. Like
Hmm.
at first, I'd have like little things here and there, like a lot of like poetry and music and whatnot that led me in that direction. But
Yeah.
as I've kept pursuing it, it's almost like a vortex that keeps pulling you in further and further and pushing you along the path. So it's
Yeah,
almost
I've
like I have to just keep following.
hmm yeah, so it's like an inner drive sort of that's like
Oh,
pulling
exactly.
you toward it. I love it. And what in what ways has magic changed your life for the better?
I would say that I owe everything to magic, really. As crazy as that might sound to some. Like my life is could not possibly be more different now than it was before I started. Like I'm in like the relationship I'm in because of magic. I'm in like the house I'm in. I mean, just like everything that I do, every aspect of my life is just totally permeated by it. And I'm like a much happier and more well-rounded human being. Like
Hmm.
I don't know. It's made me who I am in a way. It's helped me to find myself in a
There,
way that I never thought possible. And I never really even knew there was anything to find until I stumbled on this path.
yeah, that resonates with me very deeply. I feel like I understand myself more, like you said. I feel like I have greater control over my
Mm-hmm.
impulses and my desires, and it helps me to figure out what I want in life, and not only what I want, but how I could possibly get it.
Oh
Hmm.
yeah. And then even like some things that you think you might want, but it turns out like aren't really good for you. Like it helps you understand the underlying mechanisms behind that too.
Absolutely, yeah. So, you mentioned the Goetia, um, and like goetic workings. Are you? I guess I'm not asking if you're familiar with, but have you ever worked with any of like the Shimhamfarash angels or any angelic deities by chance?
Not a great deal because I still consider myself in a major way like in the preparatory
Okay.
phases of this work. Like I was like the end of the preparatory phases, but the preparatory phases nonetheless. It's like I did a lot of kind of meddling early on, like with stuff that I probably wasn't ready for, and I
Hmm.
learned a couple lessons.
Yeah. That'll happen.
Yeah.
And the preparatory phase comes back around. Like
Oh
this
yeah.
work is very cyclical, as I'm sure you've noticed.
Oh yeah.
And are there any specific entities that you like to work with or that you feel have sort of propelled you along in your magical path along the way?
Uh, propelled me along, I would say, my higher genius in a big way.
Hmm.
That's been like that is all of this started basically because I had a mystical experience where I kind of came face to face with that aspect of myself. Like I had no idea any of this stuff even existed beyond like knowing that like Jimmy Page was into Aleister Crowley and stuff like that. But like I had no clue until that happened to me, and like I kind of thought I was going crazy at first, but then I started doing my research, and it led me here eventually.
Man, yeah, that
and then
go ahead.
and then like the other deities I work with as well. Like I with the Golden Dawn, like I'm obviously quite connected to the Egyptian pantheon,
Hmm.
and I have quite a connection to the Greco-Roman pantheon as well. And
Hmm.
then I have a really strong connection with the kind of dying god archetype, but
Ah,
especially as expressed through like Osiris, Dionysus, and Christ.
okay. Very
And then, like I
interesting.
said, like I used to have a lot of fun with Tafthara, and I like the planetary forces in general, like that. I've always worked with them since I started. Cause I even like early on like started to make like my own little oil blends for
Mhm.
each planet. Like I'd have like a planetary ring with like an appropriate gemstone. But like
Love
as
it.
I started getting into the alchemy and like developing more of a like hands-on relationship with the planets, I'd say it's like that has created quite a change in me. Like purifying some of the more disharmonic aspects of the planets within
Mhm.
myself.
Very cool. Yeah, I love the idea of working with the planets and the spheres and
Mm-hmm.
having oils and tinctures and like you said, like gemstones and rings and things, and assuming the god form or the image of that like deity that's associated with it. Is that something that you have practiced or like to practice, is like the assumption of god forms?
Basically strictly with Osiris at this point, and
Okay.
it's almost happened because again, that's kind of a thing that I would consider a little bit beyond where I am right now. But that's kind of happened spontaneously
Hmm. Yeah.
within the last actually year or so, I'd say.
Mm.
It's like
I
a visualization that came about. Like there's this one way of doing the middle pillar. Like once you get to the circulation of light part, where you're kind of moving it like to your left and then like
Mhm.
coming up to your right and then down your front, up your back, and then up the kind of Sushumna column, and then comes
Mhm.
out like the fountain. But
Mhm.
at the end, there's the part where the light like kind of wraps around you and like mummifies you. And
Yes.
I every time I do that, I started to see Osiris. Like I started to
Very
see
cool.
myself as Osiris, so I just kind of started going with it,
I love that. That's something that I've
sitting.
experienced as well.
Oh
And
wow.
that sort of mummification too. When I get to that point, I sort of take that as a cue in the ritual to be like reborn, sort of.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's such a magical thing. And one of my favorite things about talking with other practitioners is the combined experiences,
Hmm.
the similarities between these internal, yeah, experiences. It's just, for lack of a better word, it's so magical.
Yeah, it is. It really is, though. That's funny.
It's funny too that you mentioned Taphthartharath because that's a spirit that I've worked with as well. And one of the experiences that I had with Taphthartharath was I did an evocation of them, and they were like, I mean, it was like the archetypal jester. It was like
Yeah.
it was almost like Jim Carrey's character in The Mask,
Wow.
just that outlandish and wild. And then I believe I assumed the god form of Thoth and was very austere and was, because like I was like trying to focus and it was just like
Yeah.
like sticking its tongue out and like blah, 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 blah. And then I assumed the god form of Thoth and it just got really serious and
Oh,
just
that's
like
amazing.
fell into line. And I was like, I'm getting chills talking about that now, but it's just so it's such a mercurial spirit, and it's funny how they really do manifest, and perhaps because it's been imprinted subconsciously, but that's no less magical to me. But
Yeah.
they can manifest the attributes of the spheres and the planets, and that's such a cool thing to me.
Yeah. It's incredible.
It's wild. And what are some recommended practices for other practitioners that you could suggest?
Uh, would you say for beginners?
Yeah, for a beginner.
One of the major things that I would suggest is before you get into any major system, perhaps think about undergoing some sort of probationary period, maybe like of a
Mm-hmm.
year or so,
Mm-hmm.
to see if you really want to pursue this. Like even do something like get a hold of some kind of introductory thing, like sorry, I'm looking at my bookshelf,
No, you're fine.
like the like Regardi's 1 year manual,
Mm-hmm.
like that introduces some like really vital practices, but does it like really slowly. And then maybe even like take it like 1 month at a time, like do each exercise month by month, and then maybe even choose like one book or two, like kind of introductory Kabbalah book, introductory tarot book, whatever you're really interested in. And even something like what's that Dion Fortune, work and training of an initiate, just like whatever can kind of give you an idea about
Mm-hmm.
the basics of magic. Yeah, oh, Crowley's the first two parts of book four, the
Mm-hmm.
magic and mysticism sections are pretty good for a beginner.
Okay.
And another big thing that has been a major help for me, though I didn't get to do this first part because I didn't know about the book yet, but I would suggest reading Mark Stavish's book, Pathology of the Sublime, or watching the lecture in conjunction with the biographical study of occultists,
Okay.
so that you can learn to like recognize some of the pitfalls and like even potentially learn to avoid them within yourself. And there's like there are tons of great occult biographies out there, but I would say the best, in my opinion, is probably Perdurabo by Richard Kaczynski, and
Okay.
close second, or maybe even tie, The Women of the Golden Dawn by Mary Greer. But yeah, there are a number of occult biographies, and there's some good Regardi ones as well. But Regardi's a tougher one because Regardi's also a triple Scorpio. So no matter what you study about Regardi, you're never going to get the full picture. Because
Uh-huh.
like Regardi was the kind of guy, like when he burned his lungs doing experimenting with antimony, instead of telling people that, he told his patients that he had to go in for prostate surgery,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of also kind of funny because like prostate is ruled by Scorpio.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like there, I would recommend for Regardi like kind of a trifecta of books. There's one Crowley, what is it? Crowley's Apprentice, I believe is called, by Gerald Suster. Uh, Israel Regarding the Philosopher's Stone by Joseph Leshevsky, which I was telling you about, which
Uh-huh.
is really, really interesting because it gives a very deep insight into Regardi's relationship with Frater Albertus and his relationship with alchemy, because the author was a student of both regarding Albertus. And
Those are
then
all,
there's also another book. I think it's just a conversation with regarding. It's like a little short interview with Christopher Hyatt from
okay.
New Falcon Press. Well, Falcon Press. I shouldn't say New Falcon.
Those are all excellent suggestions, and I've actually written down a few myself that I have not even looked into yet. And I love that you also suggested like the probationary period. I believe there's a book called Kabbalah Magic and the Great Work of Self Transformation by Liam Thomas Christopher. And one of the things that it does in the sort of probationary or initiatory period is it suggests that you, off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly what they are, but it suggests that you refrain from talking about specific subjects for like the period of a
Oh,
month. It's
interesting.
like you can't discuss religion for a month. You can't discuss, and then after that month, it's like, okay, now here's a month where you can't discuss politics. Here's a month where you can't discuss magic. And
Oh,
it's
wow.
such a good, oh, I hated it,
Like
but it
training of the
helped me.
will.
Yeah, exactly. It trains your will, and it also teaches you to talk about those things in a different way.
Mm.
You can talk about magic without ever mentioning sorcery. You know what I mean? You can talk about politics without ever mentioning a single country. You know what I mean? So it's really
That
good
is
training
true.
for that as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mhm. And what is the biggest difficulty about being a practitioner in your mind?
Oof, that's tough because there are a number. But I think just like for one, just dealing with the challenging parts of yourself and even overcoming your own inertia in a way.
Hmm.
And like pushing yourself and developing like the discipline and the capacity to really actually do this.
Hmm.
It's like it seems like when you're first starting out, like and you don't really know, like this was my problem. Like you never really no one tells you unless you're in an order or something how serious this actually is. Like, and that's why I suggest the probationary period. I
Hmm.
had no idea. Not that I wouldn't have done it had I known, but I would have been a little bit more hesitant. And like it can, like this kind of thing can like magic is destabilizing by nature. Like it can create imbalances. That's a very real risk.
That's a good point. It is destabilizing by nature, but it sort of trains us to find stability within that
Exactly.
instability. That they say that change is the only constant. Well, perhaps instability is the only stability.
And that actually makes me think of another important practice.
Mhm,
We always hear about the kind of Jungian side of psychology and like Reiki and whatnot, but I would suggest looking into some more modern forms of like mindfulness-based CBT sort of psychologies, like maybe like DBT, or my favorite is called ACT, so like acceptance and commitment therapy. Because like these kind of things can train you to sort of defuse with your mind, so that like when these
mhm.
kind of things happen, you're not necessarily like so sucked into the vortex and like of the imbalance and like I don't even it's hard to even like put into words, but
Yeah.
like we get tricked into believing the narrative that we tell ourselves in our head quite often.
Hmm.
And like a solid mindfulness practice can remind us that what we believe in our heads or like the conversation that we're having in ourselves is not always necessarily the truth.
Yes.
And I think that is a vital tool for any musician.
Absolutely. Yeah. That
Because like
that.
that's sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say like one of the main saying behind ACT is you can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf.
I love that. That's excellent. I'm gonna have to use that. Yeah, what you mentioned resonates with me. It's like that inner dialogue can be so magnetizing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just got such a gravity. And a lot of times, my inner thoughts are so loud that I forget that other people aren't thinking them, or that other
Yeah,
people can't hear them.
and that's part of the trickster nature of Mercury as well.
Yeah.
Mercury is, and that's the other thing. Like Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. So there's, I was saying, I actually read recently in that evolutionary herbalism book. I wish I remembered who said it because it wasn't Seja. It was one of his friends. But because Mercury is so close to the sun, sometimes it can like trick itself into believing that it is the sun,
Mhm.
that it's the center of the whole system,
Wow. I love that. That's an excellent metaphor.
and it's meant to be in service. And I have struggled with that big time because I have my Mercury combust my sun. It's very close. And they're also in opposite signs. Like I've got the sun in Cancer conjunct Mercury in Leo. They're like within a couple degrees of each other only.
Very interesting. That sounds somewhat familiar. So, and what are some things that you could suggest avoiding when it comes to magic?
Uh, One of the biggest things is like judging other people's practices, I would say, or judging other people's progress. Because like none of us really have any idea where another person is on the path. Like we can have an idea, but we don't really know. It's like Lon Milo Duquette had a kind of nice thing I heard recently about that. Like when it was talking about like in terms of the abyss, which obviously like not many people have crossed the abyss, or like if they have, probably aren't in like too good of a condition to speak about it. But like he was saying, like, well, like if the guy on the street corner is telling you that he's crossed the abyss, who are you to say that he hasn't? And
Yeah.
it actually really got me thinking. I was like, well, who am I?
Yeah, absolutely. And
And then,
and huh?
and then related to that, I would also say like avoiding comparison, because that is a big thing. Like we get, because just humans in general, we get tricked into thinking things are very one size fits all, even like our magical systems. And I
Hmm.
think that is a little bit of a pitfall of like the Golden Dawn structure. Is a lot of people kind of get sucked into it as being kind of a one size fits all system, but we forget it's like the whole point behind it is to create individuals, not
Yeah,
just a bunch of people who have memorized the same stuff.
absolutely. The way that I think about the grades and the degree system, when someone says that they've attained a certain degree, I take that as they've attained that amount of information, but not that amount of understanding necessarily.
Yeah, oh
Very good.
totally. And then
Yeah.
like there's also even like the kind of question of like inner initiation versus outer initiation. Like
Right.
some people could have like gone through every outer initiation but not gone through the inner. And then others could have like never gone through any of the outer but have gone through all the inner. So it's like a really
Yeah.
kind of topsy turvy thing.
Yeah. That's one thing that I'm always meditating on is how many people out there who are adepts that have never been through an initiation, formally, or have
Oh yeah,
never picked up an athame, have never shuffled a tarot deck, but they're out there acting very adeptfully.
oh yeah.
And I love that. And how many people are magicians and just don't even realize it, or would hate the thought of someone calling them that.
That reminds me of Crowley's old mountain climbing companion. I can't remember his name, but he was a guy. He'd never done any magic, but he actually taught Crowley like mental training and like control
Hmm.
over his mind, just based on like his own work as a mountain climber, which I thought was like crazy. And like Crowley said, like this guy was like ahead of some of the people he had left behind in the Golden Dawn.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's very, very strange. The nature of consciousness is very strange. So
Oh yeah,
certainly our experience through the lens of consciousness is going to be very strange as well.
yeah, very much.
How is magic and the occult typically viewed in your area?
Uh, we live in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. Just like it's a really, really strange place. Like for some reason, there's like all sorts of alien stuff around here. Like we have like this big restaurant like in the middle of the city called the Flying Saucer that is literally a giant flying saucer. We just had like an alien cafe open around the corner. People are like all obsessed with cryptids and stuff. And there's like quite a few different like magical stores and communities in the area. I wouldn't say occultism, like the Western tradition, is necessarily very well represented here. But there are things like there's one place that is like very into like voodoo and like African traditional religion stuff. Then there's like lot of like New Age community stuff. There's like quite a bit of Wiccan. There was actually a few months ago a really big pagan pride festival here, and we went to it. We could not believe the number of people who were there. It was actually like really inspiring to see.
That's awesome.
So it is like I think it's pretty accepted and embraced in our area, but I would say like this particular tradition is maybe a little bit underrepresented.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. And you've mentioned several several books already. Um, is there any film or music that you could recommend that might be of assistance to practitioners out there?
Hmm. Film would be hard for me because like I think anything that I would think of, people probably would have already said.
Okay. Okay.
I might recommend like a slightly different book. And then music, like my musical taste, not necessarily like conducive to spiritual growth necessarily, but I would say like another sort of different book. Because I ordinarily wouldn't recommend such kind of theosophical material, but I last year read a really, really wonderful book that spoke to me called The Initiate by Cyril Scott, who was
Hmm.
actually a musician in like around the 20s, 1920s.
Okay.
But it's just a very interesting book. It's about his experiences with this adept who he knew and who was kind of his teacher, and like his relationships with all the people in the community. And then I guess at the end, the adept kind of he left, so he projected this entire book into Cyril Scott's consciousness for him to write. And it was called, I think, The Circuitous Journey. But
Huh.
this story is it's like this initiatory journey, but it really, really, really spoke to me.
I love that. I'm gonna have to look into that. And what are your plans for the near future of your practice and your studies?
I'm always kind of doing so much. So I think like, I have a bunch of projects on the go right now. So I think I'll be doing quite a bit of work with those. But I'm planning on kind of getting really deep into the actually like the study of herbalism over the summer to kind of amp up my alchemy game. I got a bunch of books also on like wine making so I could
Cool.
learn to ferment a bit better. Because I'm like I finished the kind of seven basic tinctures. Now I'm moving on to like slightly more advanced practices where I'll be using like more distillation and things like that. So and fermentation, which that's the I've done a bit of practice, quite a bit of practice actually with distillation already, but fermentation is something I'm not entirely comfortable with yet. So like I'm working on something right now, but I thought it might be helpful if I actually learned how to make like some wines or meads or something. Because actually that was another thing from the Joseph Leshevsky book, because he said that Vergardi learned the art of the winemaker to help him in his spagyric practice. Because like in order to create like a true like plant stone, you need to have that part down pat because that's how you get the mercury of an herb.
Okay. Very interesting. And you also mentioned the seven basic tinctures. Is that something that you could just briefly tell us a little bit about?
So that was usually like one of the first tasks of like the student of alchemy was to select an herb for each of the seven planets and to create a tincture based on it. Because
Mhm.
the idea is that once you finish them all, you take each one like Frater Albertus used to say like a teaspoon of each per day, but of the appropriate planetary hour of the day, of course.
Sure,
And
sure.
over the course of the year that you take them, they're supposed to kind of not only cleanse out your actual body, but your like spiritual anatomy as well. Like what you would like your what some systems would call like your nadis or your meridians or whatnot.
Very cool. Yeah,
And
I go ahead, please.
oh sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Uh so and the idea is that like it helps these forces to like move through your harmonic. And
Hmm.
if you do it from a really like theurgic place, especially while you're doing some of the things like calcination, some of the more disharmonic aspects will come out of you.
Hmm.
So like they say the idea behind calcination is almost like you're purifying like the clephotic aspect of the planet as you're doing it. And even when you do it, like the change of colors, like in the end, like you mentioned the negrito part, that the blackness that corresponds to Bina,
Hmm.
and then once it turns gray, it's like in its Hokmah phase, and then
Exactly.
white goes to Kether. So you're like slowly like sending it back up the tree
Yeah,
when you reintegrate it, because
that's
that's like
excellent.
the body of the plant. So a lot of the times, like in standard herbalism, like the tincture is made without the salts being reincorporated into it. So they don't necessarily have this quite as profound an effect on the body. And
Hmm.
also the recombination cultivation makes the ingredients more bioactive. It's like I don't know the chemistry behind it very well. I've
Hmm.
got that's another thing. I've got one weakness. I've got to study the chemistry side quite a bit
Hmm.
more.
Okay.
But it's like I think the tincture components are more acidic and the salts are more alkaline and they come
Uh-huh.
together and have sort of a reaction. I've actually seen an observable reaction a couple of times.
Very cool. So,
But the
what?
Venus one was one of the coolest because it actually like foamed up. So it made me think of the kind of the birth of Aphrodite from the sea foam.
Wow. That
And
okay.
that's the other cool thing is like weird little things like that
Wow.
will happen. that are like somehow like signify the planet.
It makes me wonder how
In the
much
process.
of the legends and the mythos around these deities stems from natural reactions like that.
Oh, I imagine like almost all of it in a way.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And what, for those of us who are just now getting into the laboratory aspects of alchemy, what is a basic setup that you could recommend just for very, very beginner experiments?
For absolute beginners, I would say get a box of mason jars. I still use mason jars
Hmm.
because you might as well just do like a simple kind of maceration to
Hmm.
start off with, because it's like in order to create like if you're going to be distilling your own alcohol, that will take a lot longer. So
Sure.
you want to get the start off, you want to do something simple, like just use brandy or something, like Jean Dubuis recommended,
Okay.
and I've had great luck with that. So I would say just use brandy as your menstruum. Uh, get a big box of mason jars. I would say a small propane stove and an unglazed porcelain crucible,
Okay.
and then some like Pyrex pans. And like with that, you can do almost everything. You could get also like a simple distillation train if you want to start with that, but it's not necessarily needed. And you can even kind of rig something up. Mark Stavish has some good instructions for that in
Okay.
the Path of Alchemy, just with some plastic tubing and jars.
Okay. Yeah, that's what little experience I have with making tinctures and extracts. We have something where I'm from called Everclear, which
Oh
is
yeah,
like
Everclear.
95% alcohol.
Yeah,
But I found that with the mason jars, I have to use, I put a layer of wax paper between
oh yeah,
the actual metal and the substance. Otherwise, it'll like sort of rust. But
yeah.
yeah, I think the mason jars are a great suggestion from what little experience I do have. I haven't considered using brandy. That's very interesting.
Part of
So
the reason behind that is like a lot of the early alchemical stuff suggests that alcohols that have been distilled from red wine are the like highest vibratory substance in the plant kingdom,
mhm.
and like it's kind of related to like the blood of Christ type thing as well.
Very interesting. And and it's interesting that you mention wine because I was just reading Practical Alchemy by Brian Cotnoir, and he mentioned something about grapes. I think I texted it to my partner because it it blew my mind. Let's see. I'll search for grape in my messages. There it is.
You guys
So
have a similar dynamic to us over here.
yeah. So oh, I actually read it. I said it
Oh, voice memo.
in a voice memo, and I don't. There's two here, so away, but it was like a so I just decided to start eating grapes again, and I just decided to start taking part in laboratory alchemy. And I'm sitting here reading the root of alchemy is the grapevine. The root of alchemy is the grape. Can you actually
Wow.
hear the voice memo?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and play it then. The root of alchemy is the grapevine.
Without wine, vinegar, vinegar is made from wine. Without wine, vinegar, and salt of tartar, all obtained from this noble plant, there would be no alchemy.
So that yeah, I thought that was fascinating. The
Yeah.
tartar, the wine, the vinegar all comes from this noble plant that is the grape. And yeah, so you just mentioned using red wine, and I was like, they would probably find this interesting. So
Oh, that's amazing.
I might spare our audience and edit some of that out. But yeah, I appreciate your patience because it was driving me crazy.
No worries. I wanted to hear.
Awesome. Well, was there anything else that you wanted to cover or that you wanted to mention?
Hmm. Uh, I think that's pretty much good.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time and your interest in doing this, and I wish you well, and
I really
maybe
appreciate you having me. I
of
hope that was
course,
okay.
huh?
I hope that was okay.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed this, and
Me
you
too.
know, I'm a little bit I'm a little bit wild in my delivery sometimes, so these things can kind of be all over the place, and
Oh, me too. That's kind of what I was worried about.
no worries, no worries.
Because like I'm
Uh,
so excited about this stuff. Like it's like, and then like
yes.
you're giving me a chance to talk about it. I'm like, oh, here we go.
No worries at all. Yeah, and if you're interested, maybe sometime in the future we can have you back on in a few months or a year, and we can sort of see what's changed and what's stayed the same in your practice.
Oh, I'd like that.
Very cool. Well, have a good rest of the weekend, and I'm sure
Oh,
we'll
you
be
too.
having some more discussions
Oh,
off
for sure.
camera.
Oh, definitely. I'm sure.
Awesome. Well, take care, and thanks again so
Well,
much.
take care. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Bye bye.